Hello, everybody. My name is Mac. I go by Mac. I'm a Vietnamese refugee. Family's a refugee from Vietnam. My dad fought in the war. That was really chaotic, as some of y'all remember. I come from socially toxic environments. I was introduced to violence at a very young age. Logically, I would end up in the foster system. When I entered that foster system way back when, the day I turned 18 was the day I had to leave. And that was in the middle of high school. And logically, from that point on, in the 90s, it's not like what it's today. The minute you turned 18 is the minute foster care ended. From that point on, of course, scared, mind of a 13-year-old, I engaged with the justice system. So I'm what's considered as a dually engaged student at Berkeley. I'm a member of Berkeley Underground Scholars. I'm also a Hope Scholar. I view education through the intersectionality and implication of disability, foster care, carcerality more broadly. I was accepted at multiple universities, including Ivy League, but I knew I can make a difference at a university like Cal. I'm a sociologist. In my senior year, I research employment outcomes for formerly incarcerated college graduates. But it wasn't easy when I first got there. I was denied access to Hope Scholars when I first got there because maybe I was too old or maybe I had a certain look, who knows. And that was tough. Finding housing for someone who's formerly incarcerated or from the foster system, there's no relying on mommy and daddy to get any of that. That has been passed since the 90s. So it was really difficult, and it hurt my heart because I'm a Guardian Scholar from community college. I'm active board member of pivotal foster programs in Santa Clara County. So not being accepted was really tough. But I was able to pull through. And here's the kicker of what people that come from my demographics are. It's great if you come from lineage of college graduates, but first generation students, vulnerable populations, undocumented, formerly incarcerated, foster program, we have a certain ability that most students don't. I created the first all formerly incarcerated research team, fully funded. I also assisted on the creation of the first all undocumented research team at UC Berkeley. I helped assist, and I'll never say I created. I'm in the process of helping create the first women of color research team because that's what needs to happen. And right now we're talking to a tenured professor about creating a first former foster research team. I also created a near-peer program called NavCal on this campus. This program is through the vision of how I entered this school and what I thought best could be done for first-generation students. It's a hands-on, high-touch approach. Last semester, our students of 44 won $140,000 in scholarships. We have an average GPA of 3.5. We left some flyers out on the desk for you.
Which we will distribute.
All of our students got at least, I think only one of last semester didn't get at least one letter of rec from a tenured professor, and y'all went to grad school, you know how important that letter of rec is. A lot of first-gen vulnerable populations, by the time they're done looking outside of that book, it's already time to apply. So we deem that really important. My question to you is, what could we have really done if we were fully funded? What could we have really done if our basic needs were matched up? I do that with ease, but life is hard. Finding a place to live is hard. I sat on campus because I was too scared to go outside and look for housing. As someone who's a foster and formerly incarcerated, it isn't impossible. I make some recommendations today. We want to move from priority housing, as some of the legislature has said, to the highest priority. Remember, when you're talking about foster youth on the campus of UC Berkeley, or I do research on this stuff, you're talking less than 100 students at this moment, right? The UC systems can solve this. UCOP, regents can put bylaws down and say, we need to make sure that 100 students have access to first rounds of housing, right?
Can I interrupt for just a second? When you say 100 students, are you talking about there's 100 students at UC Berkeley that are from foster youth? Or-
There's 60 in the program.
Yeah,
There's
it's about 60.
100 underground scholars, system-impacted students. I can say from my, empirical evidence, there's an undetected number of about double that are shameful to, they don't want to say that like they were in the foster system. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's anywhere that you have like a VETS program or a reentry student program, you're going to have system-impacted students that just won't come out. And normally I don't come out, but for our Chancellor, I'll be here today, right? We should reevaluate the Regent Scholarship and not just be merit-based from students that their parents went to a great UC, and it must be nice to have that parental emotional guidance to get themselves to another UC. We should have Regents prioritized for vulnerable population, undocumented students, formerly incarcerated, foster, multi-year system-wide investments in underground scholars. Underground Scholars is chaptering in every school right now as we speak. Berkeley Underground Scholars supports 500 incarcerated students. We support about 200 to 300 community college students, and they're coming. There's no way. We're producing and we're moving towards getting more fosters here. Being stagnant at 60 for this long is not. 2% graduate college. Out of the 2%, how many make it to a school like Berkeley? So we're like 1% of the 2%. Does that make sense? And pushing these numbers will push like societal change. For me, an overall recommendations from the Regents to remove age restrictions on foster programs. I did research on public peer comparison of R1 institutes. Some have age restrictions on foster, some don't have age restrictions, and that's normally tied to funding, but there's two aspects. There's funding and community. No foster who has paperwork, who's like, when I say the term foster, I'm saying like abandonment from parents. The state had to intervene in your life as a child. That no foster, how old they are, if they're 70 years old, if they have the paperwork, they should be a part of these programs. That's an identity that no one else can normally understand. Postgraduate fellowships. We're not tracking how vulnerable populations graduate college, but I can tell you from experience, most of them will find themselves homeless. And if you start tracking your privileged populations, going back home to mommy and daddy's house while they think about life is great, and it must be nice. But that's not the case for formerly incarcerated and foster. We need to start opening doors up because we understand people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. Similar to like the undocumented student programs, looking at foster and formerly incarcerated with like full-on mental health support. I know USP at UC Berkeley has 2 workers for mental health support. For formerly incarcerated and foster, there isn't mental health support sitting on the sidelines waiting for us. We use the tank system as others. And of course, at this point, everybody in here is pretty educated, we'd say. Mass incarceration has affected many of our families, and they target communities. Foster youth enter the system at 70%, and that's a lot. And for someone that's from the foster system, the state was my guardian. It's the state's responsibility. I asked the Regents to start considering recruiting and hiring formerly incarcerated and foster youth. For me, as an underground scholar, we need to reevaluate how the UCOP sets guidelines for the use of the criminal background check. As someone who is an underground scholar, when I graduate, I will be a scholar. I should be judged on those merits of scholarship and the work I've produced. Going through 8 years of school on average, that's what someone formerly incarcerated takes to get a BA. Holding on to hope with no reality is deafening. The fact that I continuously go into debt and I don't know if I can pass. Reevaluating how they use the term critical jobs that need the background check. For me, the way I see this is that as an underground scholar, as a graduate from UC Berkeley, that is enough of a background check. And we ask and we probe organizations that do this work, how many formerly incarcerated are you hiring? And Lastly but not leastly, Rebecca's a dear friend of mine. And unlike most speakers here, we are from this vulnerable population. I do take off time from work because I need to work to be here. So does my dear friend Rebecca. And we do that because we care about our community, and we're here to change the world because we felt the bottom. What we recommend to this Regents Committee that anytime asking vulnerable populations to come support the growth of their communities, that some form of gratuity be sent down to people. I know Rebecca's losing hours at her work, which I know for a fact that housing is always a problem. I myself is the same. I want this board to consider any time asking vulnerable populations to set aside the notion of like, we should stipend out these students. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a lot, I understand. Whenever I do this, it doesn't, we have good times at Berkeley too, all right?
Chancellor Bostrom.
Yeah, Mac, a few years ago, I was working with the Berkeley Underground Scholars. I was Froggy at the time.
Yes, yes.
And one of the big pushes was ban the box. Where do we stand on ban the box, both statewide and federal?
Ban the box is good for some people. Some of the data, it's really bad for black men. If they don't have any hope to hang on to that this, 1 in 4 or X amount of African-American males, then they're just gonna weed them out from their bias. Right now, it's showing it's bad. Some form of, again, we keep going back to that uniformity. There's no uniformity. We look at, so that's exactly what I study. And it's funny because I'm studying for my livelihood right now. It's like I'm on a boat just throwing water off as I do my research. But if there's gonna be no uniformity, then we have to go towards moving towards a governor's direct pardon as you graduate as part, for the CSU's Project Rebound or Underground Scholars, that the data proves that someone that's formerly incarcerated at college, as a college graduate is less likely to offend than a normal person on the street, so.
Regent Oakley.
It's the question of, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And that's on the front loaded of the box.
Application.
But when they took it off, now employers are now just looking at race now. They're just staring right at race.
You touched on an issue that, I've used as a soapbox many times, which is the importance of improving the transfer function between the community colleges and the UC. And why do I bring this up? Because your experience is the experience of community college students. There are more formerly incarcerated, more foster youth, more vets, more CalWork students, more undocumented students in the community colleges than any other of our systems. So there is a ton of experience happening at that level and a ton of network being built and a ton of support being built that doesn't always carry over to students who are now transferring to the CSU or to the UC. So, I think it's an opportunity for us to reflect on how do we build a better system that supports the needs of students like yourselves, to ensure that those students who have gotten the least access, the least opportunity, now get their fair share of opportunity. And so, to my colleagues in the UC, these are issues that we need to spend time on between the systems. We spend so much time on the minutia of transfer policy, and we forget about how that minutia impacts the lives of people like you who are looking just for the opportunity to be able to get into the UC. It's a whole other issue. Obviously we need to do a better job of helping you persist in the UC, helping you live in the UC, but just getting you here is a feat in of itself. So, there are more and more students like you in our system of higher education. So I think this is a call to action for us to do more to improve the transfer pipeline and the pipeline period. to allow more opportunity for students like you?
I would first want to point out that you epitomize what the UC is here for, to change trajectories. When given the opportunity, not only are you changing your own trajectory, but you are truly changing society's trajectories, and that is the shining example of who we are and why we're here.
You spoke a fair amount about what you could use for help and support while you're on campus, but I wondered if you had any recommendations for how campuses could support you as you transition when you leave school, when you start careers, when you go on. What kind of campus resources could be helpful at that juncture?
Postgraduate fellowships, right? And there are some, but for us to compete against the groomed, the privileged poor who went to private high schools, had tutoring, as Dr. Tony Jack would say, that's really hard. Versus these fellowships are for formerly incarcerated foster after graduation. Again, I understand it might be simpler, but understand with what student engagement might be happening at this Regents level. For a student to go to Washington or go hang out and do things, wow, they can read books. Because at Berkeley, I have 90 pages I need to read right now. This is the caliber of Berkeley. For students to be able to sit here and engage and like wave their hand until you hire them, that's great. But for a Regents board to walk back to UC Berkeley and say, I want to hire formerly incarcerated, and we do the data, nobody's hiring, so nobody's recruiting for foster. So for us, that would be a step off the ledge and say, like, let's take a chance. But think about the different perspective that could be added to these boards. This comes with ease. We've been in the foster system between me and her for the last 30, 40 years. With that notion, we've seen people try to solve issues that are from vulnerable populations. We've watched people say, I know how to solve these poor people's problems. And we know it gets nowhere. The foster system has been as bad, mass incarceration has been as bad since day one. But for someone that's been through this, that's an easy win for both sides. But opening up UCOP fellowships, because getting us at the table means we're not lunch. And one day we have to make, and we're moving this way no matter what happens. All of us sacrifice a lot of our time to make sure other students make it to Berkeley. We're sacrificing a lot of time that students will get to the highest R1 graduate schools. But what can you all do in that sense of supporting that growth, supporting the after, that year after, where students, and that we see it, you get yourself in $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in debt, you're never going to change that system. And that's that year-long fellowship, employment opportunities, but branching out to the systems that you guys are involved with to further that.
Thank you.